And what I witnessed then was that the angelic choirs above that were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that were fueling this beautiful scene of festivities in the Gateway Valley below, in fact, they served to generate yet another portal, another musical portal into higher and higher levels. And just as I'd been ushered up from the earth from my view by a musical portal or a wormhole or what have you, likewise, these angelic choirs provided another portal to higher and higher levels. And I remember seeing all of the material realm and four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of the spiritual realm that I was witnessing, this place where birth to death, everything in between can be simultaneously presented. So time flow in that realm is completely different and much higher order than Earth time. But all of that collapsed down into this complex oversphere as I entered what I call the core.
Okay. My guest today is Dr. Eben Alexander, who was a neurosurgeon and a self-proclaimed atheist who believed that when you died, you became nothing. But his belief was completely changed when he had an experience with meningitis that caused him to look at the science and understand how complex the brain really was. And his is the most incredible story I have ever heard of a near death experience. And I'm going to share some stories about how I know it's transformed lives of other people that I'm connected to. So, Dr. Alexander, I'm so excited for you to be here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Laurie, it's a real joy to be with you today. Thanks so much for having me on. And I love your work in getting this kind of notion out to the world at large.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. So I want to share something before I have you share your story. That is that when your book, Proof of Heaven, came out in 2012, I had just lost one of my closest soulmates on earth. And although I had been on a spiritual journey for a long time, that loss propelled me to begin reading every book by every medium and all of these books that started to come out. And yours was one of the first ones talking about near death experiences. And when I read it, it wasn't like I was looking for any type of proof that we had an existence beyond this one. I already believed that. But what struck me so much about your book was the science and how your NDE happened to you to allow you to do this analysis of the brain, and how a lot of people who are very scientifically based think that the brain is having an illusion. It's not functioning in the way that we think it is. And so you're really not having this experience that near death experiencers claim to have. But yours debunked that to such a degree that my husband at the time was a very, very analytical person. He was agnostic. He didn't really believe that there was anything, and he feared death. And he was not a reader except for hunting magazines. But I told him that I wanted him to read your book, and he did. It changed everything for him. He
Mhm.
completely, after reading your book, believed that God existed, believed that we didn't die, and he lost his fear for death. This has been
That's
many years ago now, but
mhm.
it changed the trajectory of how he processes life. And I just want you to know that just one person, like I'm just one person, your book is sold over 5 million copies. I can't imagine the ripple effect that you have had by sharing this story. So I want to thank you so much, because you were an academic doctor who didn't have any reason to do this, except when somebody really has a profound experience, it can change everything about their life, and yours has.
Well, absolutely. I'm glad it has helped you and helped your former husband and helped so many people. I mean, there were thousands who contacted me after Proof of Heaven first came out. I still get a lot of communications, but that basically told me that my experience, something about the way I reported it, what have you, reminded them of something buried deep in their own memories that they had never actually acknowledged. So these experiences are very kind of broad and powerful, and they show us we're much more than just a physical body living birth to death and nothing more. In fact, we are all souls. We have an eternal existence. We're in the process of elevating and evolving all of consciousness throughout the universe. So it's a very major kind of development beyond the simplistic falsehoods of materialism that I worshiped for so long. And I do not use that term lightly, because materialist science is a faith-based religion that has a lot less to support it than many of the faith-based religions. And when I say that, I'm honoring science, because science itself is a very powerful tool to getting to these deep truths. But to many people, our conventional science is a materialistic form of Newtonian determinism that actually has been disproven for almost a century by quantum physics. And yet quantum physics is obviously a deep challenge and mystery to the scientific community, but they're slowly getting to the point of understanding what it really means. And what quantum physics has been trying to point out to us is the primacy of consciousness, that we're sharing one mind, that we're all in this together. There is truly one mind, and that when our brain and body die, we're liberated back into a kind of a unification with that mind. But there is a certain viscosity, is the word I use, that maintains a soul line between lives. So it's not just a pure rejoining of the ocean of consciousness, but there's some preservation of our sense of individuality that's preserved. And there's a huge part of the scientific discussion of this is reincarnation, which is really proven beyond any doubt in the scientific literature. If you look at, for example, University of Virginia, they've studied more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children over 6.5 decades. And of those, 1,700 are what they call solved. That is, they actually found the person who lived before that the child is describing. So reincarnation is absolutely part of our modern scientific understanding of the human condition. And yet so many scientists have no idea that this is really where all the science is going, that our consciousness is filtered in by the brain, but that ultimately we're sharing this kind of one mind of the universe.
I am so glad that you brought that up about reincarnation. It's something that I've been passionate about. I read a book a long time ago called Old Souls, where this man for 20 years had studied children all around the world who had these remembrances of being somebody else, and they were able to document them with a name and a town and knowledge that they couldn't have possibly had, recognizing people when they would go to these places. And I interviewed the author of that book, and I put a couple of these videos on my channel, and I'm always shocked at how few people watch them, because there's still some stigma with the religion that exists right now that doesn't allow people to believe in that aspect for some reason.
Right. Well, it was all kind of a misinterpretation of things through history. I mean, I learned a lot about that whole question of reincarnation, for example, in Christianity. Um, and it's obvious that Jesus Christ knew of reincarnation. He thought John the Baptist was a reincarnation of an earlier prophet. So reincarnation was fully accepted in his time. And what they realized was that this discussion of reincarnation would in some ways disempower the tithing, the priesthood, all the steps they were trying to do to formalize Christianity, but use it to control people. And in fact, Constantine made any talk of reincarnation punishable by inverted crucifixion, which was the worst form of execution he could think of, because he realized how damaging such discussions of reincarnation, which was known to be true back in Christ's time, would derail their attempts to control people through this, their vision of the church and how it should interact with human beings. So anyway, it was all a smoke and mirrors trick by patriarchal committees centuries after Christ lived that gives us the modern misinterpretation and misunderstanding that says that Christianity is not compatible with the notion of reincarnation. That's absolutely false. And the scientific literature is so stunning on this that once you study it, you realize absolutely reincarnation happens. But the obvious thing that needs to be pointed out is that what Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson, who are the two heads at UVA who have done this work, will tell you that you must harvest these memories from the children before age 6 or 7, because of natural processes that cover them over, so that by age 10 or 11 or 12 or going into teens and adulthood, they don't have those memories of past lives and between lives anymore. Or they're deeply buried. They can be resurrected through hypnotic regression, through meditation, centering prayer. There are ways you can get to them. An NDE can uncover past memories of past lives, et cetera. So there are ways to get at it. But, most of us run around saying, well, I don't remember living before, so this reincarnation talk is nonsense. but that is all planned. It's part of the plan. But when you actually study children who remember past lives, as scientists at UVA have and other places, Jim Matlock, Carol Bowman, there are many investigators. But you find that there's a very definite reality to this story of reincarnation and children remembering past lives that indicates we are eternal souls. We are bound together through the forces of unconditional love that so many NDEs and shared death experiencers talk about. But ultimately, the knowledge that is available to us in these bodies in our kind of ego mind is not the full set of knowledge that gives us the higher soul perspective. And that's why meditation and centering prayer are so important, to spend time gaining personal experience by exploring consciousness. And that's why I love Sacred Acoustics and highly recommend sacredacoustics.com to anyone who wants a powerful tool for deep and very life-enhancing meditative techniques.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about that in a few minutes. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because as a physician, one of the things that I know, because I was a pharma rep, is that you're trained to look at, understand, and interpret clinical studies for their validity based on statistical significance and p-value. So for you to sit on my show and talk about these studies and say these are real, it's because you know how to recognize a well-designed study to know if it's true or if it's just manipulating the data, right?
Right, exactly. So, yeah, there's just so much to it. If you start reading that literature, you realize that to pretend that reincarnation never occurs is just misleading yourself. You're fooling yourself. A prejudice that's taking you away from the truth. And it's one of the biggest problems with kind of our materialist science of the late 20th and early 21st century is in some ways it was in a headlong rush to disprove and dismiss and deny any evidence that suggested a larger universe that we're part of. And yet that's the reality that all of this reveals to us. And quantum physics is right at the heart of it all, because quantum physics is telling us that when we look around at this world around us, all the electrons, protons, quarks, atoms, molecules that make up the stuff around us, those constituents are quantum particles. They can have superposition, be in multiple places at once. They can become entangled through subatomic events where they're created together. But then a measurement on any one particle can reveal a deep truth about the other particle, that they're still interconnected across space and time in ways that completely violate our normal thinking of causality in a four-dimensional space-time. Entanglement, spooky action in a distance, as Einstein called it. And Einstein was wrong. He thought it was due to hidden variables, but it's not. And all the Bell experiments that have been done over the last 40, 45 years have proven that entanglement is absolutely real. And to many of us who investigate consciousness, it's crystal clear that entanglement is simply revealing this kind of conscious field that traverses across space and time that sentient beings have access to. And I would say quantum physics, and in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we go into great detail about taking quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, and all the evidence for non-local consciousness out of parapsychology, and uniting that information and set of arguments with evidence and rational argument, linking them together to show the prominence, primary nature of mind in the universe, that we're sharing one mind. The brain is a filter that allows in a little eddy current of that shared mind, but that ultimately all of physical reality emerges from the top-down causality of that mental realm of interconnected primordial mind. So it's a big scientific revolution. It's a great news to all of us, because the false sense of separation inherent in materialist teachings has been very damaging and has allowed for greed and allowed for like things like corporate greed and energy scientists to ignore the data that shows that burning carbon-based fuels ultimately heats the planet. We've known that for 2 centuries now. And yet we act as if it's not true. And we're ready to cause extinction of millions of species through our ignorance and our blind kind of following of this materialist science that ignores the binding force of love, that we're all in this together, that we're here to take care of each other and not to damage and destroy this beautiful planet that's been gifted to us.
Wow. Well, if your second book is anything as compelling as your first book, I would imagine that you're going to help millions of people through that information, along with Karen Newell and her contribution too. So I'm excited to check that out. So this is such a far cry from where you started before this near-death experience happened, as a very scientific neurosurgeon. So will you explain a little bit about who you were before this all happened to you?
Well, I can say I had grown up in a very scientific family. I was adopted. That's a huge part of my story. Anybody who's read Proof of Heaven will realize how critical it is to
Yes.
understanding things.
But we're not going to give it away here. They have to
No, we're
read the
not.
book.
That's exactly right. But the reality is, I was adopted into a wonderful, loving family. My adoptive father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon. He was a great mentor to me. And it turns out that he had grown up the son of a general surgeon in Eastern Tennessee during the Depression and World War II. He was a combat surgeon, the Second World War. But his dad took him to church, and my dad was a firm believer in God. Now, he was very scientific. He knew all about Big Bang cosmology and physics and neuroscience. But to him, it all made perfect sense. There was a loving, personal God. Prayer worked, etc. He used it in his life. And to him, there was great satisfaction in combining science and his knowledge of the reality of God. Like so many of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, like I did, I always knew that science was going to be my pathway to truth, but I made the same mistake that so many people, especially used to make in the late 20th century, but still many people make today, and that is thinking that science is a Newtonian deterministic form of materialist science. They ignore quantum physics completely, or pretend that it's a mystery that is inexplicable. And that is, that's where you run into big trouble. And quantum physics has a tremendous amount to add to this discussion of primacy of consciousness, but it still escapes some materialist scientists. The kind of wisdom that deeper knowledge of the connection of quantum physics and kind of the mental field exemplified by entanglement tells us. But that's who I was before. I wanted to believe what my father believed, but I was so into kind of the science and what we could measure and all my training, it kind of drew me away from some of the deeper spiritual truths. And luckily, my NDE reversed all that completely and was a very natural antidote to that foolish belief in materialist science that I had harbored for so many years. But for scientists who study consciousness, and there are hundreds of us aligned in this work around the world, it's become crystal clear that Newtonian determinism, that conventional science, is not true at all, and that a quantum-informed vision of reality is essential. And what I will point out is not only did the founding fathers of quantum physics, like Werner Heisenberg and Max Planck and Erwin Schrödinger and others, talk about how consciousness seemed to be a fundamental unified property of the universe compared to everything else. And in studying the subatomic world, that becomes an obvious truth, that there's something about the mind of the observer that is deeply important in anything that is discovered within the material world. And the mind itself is playing a tremendous role. John Archibald Wheeler, who was the head of physics at Princeton in the mid-20th century, he was on the Manhattan Project and a very renowned quantum physicist, he defined something called the participatory anthropic principle, which is that there was something about, anthropic is us humans interacting with the world, and we have to participate in its creation. And that's what he was pointing out, is you cannot simply pretend that mind is some epiphenomenon that has nothing to do with free will and with an interaction with the universe, which many materialist scientists do, but in fact acknowledge that consciousness is fundamental. And the thing that we experience as humans is our consciousness. We don't experience some naked external reality. And in fact, there's great evidence from quantum physics that what we witness is that world around us, that none of it is there independent of the mind and the free will of the choices of the observing person. The entity observing that reality has a deep influence on what emerges. And it's also a non-local consciousness. things like telepathy are absolutely real. Read Guillaume Playfair's book on twin telepathy, where he says 35% of identical twins have a powerful telepathic connection, so strong that a twin can touch a hot stove and the other twin 1,000 miles away will feel pain and develop the blister. So that's a strong connection. And that is all part of entanglement. That's all part of this deeper acknowledgement of the world of consciousness and our understanding of it. And the primacy of consciousness is a critical principle. And all this is brought together in a sensible scientific fashion in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe.
Okay, excellent. So you were not a stranger to near-death experiences because as a neurosurgeon, you had people who died and came back, and you had a few of your patients talk to you about their experiences. And what was your reaction back then?
Well, like many materialist scientists, I would kind of pat them on the back, reassure them that we don't know everything. And, just I wouldn't deny it. I didn't want to deny any kind of hope or reason they had. But, in my mind, I said, well, the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks and blah, blah, blah. I had all kinds of ways to dismiss it as we can't understand how all that could be. But certainly having my own experience opened my mind and my eyes tremendously to the potential, and where the scientific world is going on this is a much grander reality that acknowledges the primacy of consciousness, the power our will has to influence our unfolding reality. And to me, it's a very refreshing revolution in science to finally be getting to this stage of acknowledging primacy of consciousness, the kind of unification of our minds, and how we're all bound together through the forces of love, which is what near-death experiences teach us so profoundly. But in our
Yeah.
book, Living the Mindful Universe, we go into great kind of expansion, not just near-death experiences, but shared death experiences, all the other parapsychological phenomena that are important for the demonstration of non-local consciousness, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, quantum physics. Every bit of it is brought together in that book to make the case for basically evolutionary panentheism, the notion that God mind is all throughout this universe, that we share it, we're all united through it, but that it's all evolutionary, that quantum indeterminacy is what opens the future widely for our influence as sentient beings to bring the world of our dreams into reality.
So will you share with us in whatever way you want to your near-death experience?
Yes, I'll do it. I'll try and be brief because, I've described it obviously in Proof of Heaven and in many YouTube videos. People can get a much more detailed version of the story by looking at some YouTube videos. There's one from the Theosophical Society that has almost 6 million views where I go into a lot of detail of the elements. But for this discussion, I'll point out a few things. First of all, an unusual ingredient of my NDE was that I was amnesic. I had no memory of Eben Alexander's life. I will point out that near-death experiences are always and absolutely tailored for the individual who has them. They're part of a soul journey. The very fact that we can combine many NDEs to make sense of them and start understanding their deeper message is wonderful. But ultimately, they're only there for the benefit of the individual soul having them. And for a neurosurgeon like me, who had the kind of questions I had about the brain-mind connection and nature reality, the dive I took was very illustrative. And it demanded that I have a complete deletion of all memories of my existence, as a precondition to go through the whole thing and then come out of it with a full return of those memories over 2 months to tell me very strongly memories are not stored in the brain. They're stored in an information field. You could call it the quantum hologram, the Akashic record. There are many terms for that information field of all the possibilities, but they're not stored in the brain. Anyway, we discuss all that in Living in a Mindful Universe for people who want to know more. But anyway, amnesia is the setting. And then my first stage of this was what I call the earthworm's eye view, very primitive course, kind of subterranean. That's where it all began. And in that setting, I had no language, no knowledge of Earth, this universe. That amnesia was extremely thick. So I was just a witness, and it was an empty slate. So I was a witness able to work independently of any prior assumptions or false assumptions about the nature of reality. And that's why the whole journey was so amazing. That amnesia was extremely powerful. Anyway, I was rescued from that ugly kind of earthworm eye view realm by this slowly spinning white light. It came back with a perfect musical melody. And that led me up into this brilliant ultra real gateway valley. Important thing to stress about that, it was much more real than this world. People often think that a near-death experience would be murky and dreamlike. Well, this existence in these bodies in the material world is murky and dreamlike compared to that reality. That reality is sharp, clear, detailed, powerful, meaningful, transformative. It's absolutely astonishing. And those memories are very resilient. Scientists who study NDEs have pointed out people have these memories for 50 years without any noticeable change in the quality or content of the memories. Going through an NDE is a very powerful experience, and that's what I got to witness. So what's happened here is I've been elevated up into that beautiful gateway valley, much more real than this world. And this would be, for example, where people would have life reviews. You've often heard your life going flashes before your eyes. Well, yes, that happens in many NDE cases. Probably about a quarter to half of them report a profound life review. And so in that, what I was going through was in that realm. Remember that in a life review, birth, death, everything in between is presented simultaneously. It's a timeless realm. And by being so, it's very difficult to describe using our language. There's a lot of what I call knowledge through identification. You become huge swathes of the scenes presented to you as part of the teaching and learning about the nature of reality. And that's what life review is all about, is kind of going through the events of one's life. And if you read scientific studies of life reviews, like Bruce Grayson's review, he's a skeptical psychiatrist who studied NDEs for the last 45 years or so. And in an article he wrote in the Journal of the Journal of Near-Death Studies in the fall of 2021, he examined his almost 700 life reviews and his series of many more NDEs, and says that 74% of the people experienced it from the perspective of everybody involved. So in other words, the life review is like the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, written into the fabric of the universe. Because if you've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, in your life review, you feel that pain and suffering you've been dishing out to others from their perspective. So it gently nudges us towards love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance. All the deep lessons of NDEs are contained right there in those life reviews. So this is just giving you a glimpse of what the power is of that Gateway Valley. And for me, the Gateway Valley, I didn't have an Eben Alexander life review, but I had a far more profound kind of generic vision of life reviews and reincarnation that came later as this whole story evolves. But in this Gateway Valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies. I never had any body awareness during any part of this. And there was this meadow down below and all these souls dancing, lots of joy and merriment, children playing, dogs jumping, incredible festivities. The whole scene was absolutely beautiful beyond description. It was like Plato's world of ideals, but for the individual soul. I labeled those souls as between lives. When I came back and wrote it all up weeks later, the souls dancing in this meadow. And I remember there was beside me on the butterfly wing was this beautiful young woman, sparkling blue eyes, high forehead, high cheekbones. She looked at me with a look of pure love. She never said a word. She didn't have to, but her deep emotional truth came to me. You are deeply loved and cherished. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for. I cannot tell you how comforting it was in that moment. It was a validation, a confirmation that this was truly a spiritual home that felt very comfortable. You know, using all these words sounds a little foreign to people, and yet thousands who read these words and heard these words, in Proof of Heaven, reached out to me and said how it reminded them of something deep in their own personal experience that had been eliminated from their memory, but now it was brought back to them. And that was the big gift. And that's what I've sensed in so many other NDE accounts I've read. At any rate, to continue with my story, this Gateway Valley, as I say, is just a gateway. And what I witnessed then was that the angelic choirs above that were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that were fueling this beautiful scene of festivities in the Gateway Valley below. In fact, they serve to generate yet another portal, another musical portal into higher and higher levels. And just as I'd been ushered up from the earth with my view by a musical portal or a wormhole or what have you, likewise, these angelic choirs provided another portal to higher and higher levels. And I remember seeing all of the material realm and four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of the spiritual realm that I was witnessing, this place where birth to death, everything in between can be simultaneously presented. So time flow in that realm is completely different and much higher order than Earth time. But all of that collapsed down into this complex oversphere as I entered what I call the core. The core was a complete resolution of all dualities. In our world, we have darkness, light, good, evil, masculine, feminine, all the different ranges and spectra of things that we try to define. In that realm, all of it comes into oneness. And in fact, in the core realm, where the entire multiverse through eternity had been shrunken down into this oversphere for teaching purposes, I sense the God presence that, and we try and label it. God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. I don't care what terms you use. We don't own that. That is, in fact, is the origin of our very existence. And in fact, that's why I called that deity Om in the book Proof of Heaven, because to me, God was a puny little human word with a lot of baggage. And to describe this power of infinite love and creative vigor, and that was right there in our heart in terms of being close to us and dear and near to us, that God force, I called it Om because that was a sound I heard in that realm of, that was the sound of a kind of a resonance within infinity and eternity that I brought back to this world. And I recognize that in many ways, the more we acknowledge the love, kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, and forgiveness that are such deep messages from near-death experiences and other prophets going back thousands of years, that is the nature of our existence and who we are. And our materialist presumptions and false beliefs about the world based on materialist thought has led us into a dark cul-de-sac where we falsely believe we're separate and we're in competition with each other. Because in the 20th century, this big conversation about evolution was also part of the discussion of consciousness. And they got very misled about much of it. And that's why this deeper understanding now about the unity of consciousness and how we're all sharing that one mind, and it's the binding force of love that really connects us. That is what will revolutionize this world. And it's a scientific revolution that is inevitable because all of the evidence leads in this direction to the primacy of mind and this binding force of love. And all the rest of it is just noise and kind of misleading stuff from people who haven't been there and don't understand this. But the near-death experience community is very clear on this, as is the scientific community that studies near-death experiences, because they study much more: quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, parapsychology, non-local consciousness, and the scientists who study this much bigger set of ways to look at the world are concluding that consciousness is primary and that our will as sentient beings absolutely shapes the emergent reality that we witness.
Wow. One of the things that really struck me when I read your book is the level of intelligence that you have, yet in that place, that meningitis reduced your brain to what you called mush, where you knew, based on what had happened to you with the brain in that position, there was no way that this could have been made up by you, been the experience of a dying brain. And then further, the interesting thing about your primordial experience was the droning anvil sound that filled your existence with what I think you described it as, it felt like it was eons. And you kind of describe that as like your own experience of hell until you had that one thought, which is, this all there is? And that's when that NDE changed and you had the light come in. So can you give us a little bit of an idea of what your thoughts are now from this perspective about this place that people think about as a hell or an existence? Because I personally don't believe that there's anything but the other side where we all go, that you experience. But you've gained a lot of knowledge. You've talked to a lot of NDEers and you've studied this a lot. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, for one thing, I don't believe there's any such thing as an eternal hell. There's no way that infinitely loving God force would have a situation set up where some souls were banished for all of eternity into that kind of torment. It makes no sense whatsoever. I will say that, as we mentioned a little while ago, life reviews. If you've been selfish and greedy or caused a lot of pain and suffering for other people, your life review, it might seem hellish because you have to go on the receiving end of all that. That's the beautiful balancing act of life reviews and how they serve as kind of a mid-course correction for our soul journey to help nudge us back to the correct place. So, no, there's absolutely no way for me to see any kind of eternal hell and damnation. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that some souls, like Hitler or Putin, uh, might face a life review, given the millions of dead that they're associated with and all the torture and torment they brought to the world, their life review could be an incredibly extensive, receiving of all that kind of hatred, bigotry, and pain, and teaching them a lesson, teaching their soul lesson. So, I think life reviews happen for all of us, and that it's always in that, it's almost a neutral setting. But given that we're experiencing it and we have to then feel what we dished out to others from their perspective, it's not so pleasant if we were treating people in a way we wouldn't want to be treated. So in many ways, the golden rule is written into the fabric of the universe. Treat others as you would like to be treated in the form of the life review. But no, I don't believe there's any such thing as an eternal hell. I will also point out that I know for a while, I thought that earthworm eye view was simply the best consciousness my brain could muster while it was soaking in pus. And therefore, I was getting these beautiful glimpses of the richness of consciousness completely liberated from the shackles of the filtering mechanism of the brain, in the bright, beautiful aspects of my NDE. But what I've since in the reading after and et cetera, I came to realize, for example, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardos is kind of this murky, dark level that can be very challenging. But it's interesting, the more you study it, the more you realize that they're basically other facets of self that present as kind of these demons in that Bardo realm to help kind of, in this process of soul growth and questioning, they help to guide our soul in its journey. So I would say that my experience of the earthworm eye view was not just, some Eben Alexander went through because he had meningitis, but it's kind of a generalized pattern that sometimes we face when we leave the body and are getting more into kind of soul journey between lives, that we face some of the, aspects of ourself that are not as favorable. I mean, it's just like in the life review, seeing parts of ourselves that we now see as not so agreeable, the parts that are kind of dark because they appear dark to other people during our lifetime. And so it's all part of the soul journey. But what I tell people is don't worry, as long as like the knowledge I have now of beauty and love at the core of the universe, there's no way I would go into dying with any fear in my heart, because I know no matter what I encounter there, and that includes what might be darker aspects of my persona or what have you in these Bardos realms, pay it no mind. If your heart is filled with the love of God for the universe, that love for all of the creation, for all fellow beings, you have nothing to fear going in there. The only thing to fear is when you have been dishing out pain and suffering and you're still an agent of hardship and difficulty for others, then you do have something to watch out for when you end up diving into those life reviews. But it's simply, for me, it just affirms that we are these divine, sacred beings that are created through love, and we have the power to bring love into this world. Meditation is key, but it's absolutely how we live our lives that makes the big difference. So meditation, centering prayer, beautiful ways to kind of put the ego voice into timeout, because the ego is not who we are. That voice in your head, is not your consciousness at all. Your consciousness is your awareness of that voice. But I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls the voice in your head your annoying roommate. That's the end of the story. That's all it is. but your consciousness is a much deeper mystery. Your consciousness is related to higher soul, primordial mind, the mind of the universe. And that's the part of it that is not the little ego mind. The ego is there to do certain things to kind of preserve and maintain a physical body in this world. But the ego is your enemy in this kind of journey. And the ego is something that is lit up brilliantly, for example, in addictions and in fear of death, things like that. That's the ego fearing its elimination. And in fact, in psychiatry, you'll find it's often useful to do a ritual sacrifice of the ego to allow it to be reborn in a healthier form. Well, that's something all of us can do through meditation and centering prayer to develop and cultivate our relationship with our higher soul. Our higher soul is interconnected with other higher souls, with that mind of God. It's all interconnected at that deep core level of the universe. And through meditation and centering prayer, we can start to explore that relationship and learn a lot more about our capabilities as a soul, and not just as this kind of presumed limited form of a human body, birth to death, with the brain, and with materialist scientists trying to tell you you don't even have free will because that mental experience is just chemical reactions in the substance of the brain. That's all completely wrong, because ultimately we are souls, we are interconnected at that higher level, and the binding force is one of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, and acceptance. When necessary, forgiveness. But those are the ingredients for living this life. So ultimately, the deepest lessons of near-death experiences are not what happens when we die, but how do we best live this life moment to moment, breath to breath, and dealing with ourselves and dealing with our fellow beings. Those are the deep and profound lessons of near-death experiences and the science that studies them.
Absolutely. And this is exactly why I do this. When I first started talking to people who had near death experiences, I specifically sought out people with a life review because I knew the impact it had when you understand that what you do to somebody else, you are literally doing to yourself. It changes how you conduct your life, how you conduct your interactions with others. So I'm curious, you said you didn't have a life review of Eben Alexander, but you had this understanding of life review and the impact and the ripple effect that we have on others. So when you came back, how different were you, or how did that impact how you moved forward in your life after this NDE?
Well, it had a tremendous influence on me. As I said, I was amnesic, but in entering the core realm, there was tremendous kind of demonstration of life lessons. Um, and that's what I saw first. One passage through the core, I saw what I call the flying fish version. And that was a vision that showed each and every one of us as souls with, lifeline through many incarnations, but we were like flying fish. So down in the water, the fish are in the material realm. They're dumbed down. They're temporarily a program forgetting has eliminated their knowledge as a higher soul of between lives and past lives. And so they're down in the water interacting with each other, but with this kind of self-imposed lack of knowledge. And then they pop up out of the water. That's leaving the brain and body at the time of physical death. That's when they're enlightened, reunite with souls of departed loved ones, the other flying fish up in the air, plan next incarnations after life review, viewed together, in this beautiful setting, and then diving back in for reincarnation. But there was a later vision going through the core that made it even more imperative that I understand these deep lessons. And I'm pointing out here that do not believe that somebody's NDE will reflect their prior religious beliefs, because my prior religious beliefs from a North Carolina Methodist church in the 1960s and 70s had nothing to do with reincarnation or even with oneness with God. And yet, in this deep dive in my experience, I became one with that God force and recognized that the God force of binding force of love was right there at the core of each and every one of our conscious awareness. So we're never separate from that at all. That was a very powerful realization. But the second vision I had during my coma journey beyond the flying fish vision was this incredible sense that I call the Indra's net version. And
The
that
what?
happened in
Say that
later
again. The
passage through
what?
the
The
core.
what vision?
Indra's net, INDRA''S net. That comes from an old Eastern spiritual term, but it was seeing of a patchwork of a woven garment of beautiful threads. And each of these threads in its weave was showing our almost like breathing, incarnation body, then death of the body, back to the spiritual form. That's the exhale, then back in, out, in, out. And so I saw it as multiple lifetimes contributing to this growth towards oneness with the divine. So it's not as if the reincarnation changes the goals that I was taught, in that church of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance to others, etc. But it showed that it takes more than one lifetime to get there. And that was the thing that to me was so amazing, and kind of a general litmus test for how evolved a soul would be is how narcissistic and self-centered they are versus how altruistic or philanthropic. So a very early immature soul is very narcissistic and self-focused. A very advanced soul is one like Mother Teresa or Gandhi or Martin Luther King that is so giving of love to the world at large and knows that peace and love are the ways to best influence and help this world of ours. So these visions were very powerful, especially that Ender's Net vision. And it included not only seeing life reviews as a critical component of all this, but also noting that reincarnation was absolutely essential. And that was not something I'd ever been taught before either. So when I came back to this world, I had no knowledge of the scientific proof of reincarnation, for example, at University of Virginia. Go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. Look at their website. There's scientific information gathered over 6 decades there by incredibly capable scientists that prove reincarnation. There is simply no doubt about it. But they don't push it on people. They simply offer the evidence and allow people to judge it, what have you. And once you start reading it, you go, oh my God, this is incredible. And it's not made up. It's not imagination. These are powerful stories that have been carefully vetted by rigorous scientists who are very careful to avoid any kind of fraud or kind of misinformation. And the evidence is overwhelming for the reality of reincarnation. We just need a much bigger model for brain-mind connection and the nature of reality than our puny little materialist model that obviously fails miserably to start understanding all this. But that's where our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, takes off. And I will also add that there's now a 10th anniversary edition of the book, Proof of Heaven, that has 36 additional pages beyond the original book. And we discuss in there a lot of what's happened over the last decade. So that 10th anniversary edition is well worth it. But also Living in a Mindful Universe really goes into detail about uniting science and spirituality around all the scientific concepts and spiritual concepts that we're discussing.
I'm so glad you just said that. One of the questions I actually had to ask you is I know that near-death experiencers over time will have additional memories come to them 20 years later, 40 years later. And I was going to ask you if you had had additional memories that had come to you about your NDE over time.
Well, actually, what I've done is I've been using sacred acoustics, binaural beat brainwave entrainment for 11 or 12 years now, very effectively, not just to return to my NDE from memories, but to engage and cultivate a relationship with the various aspects, of that. I discuss some of that expansion of my journey through meditation in Living in a Mindful Universe, so people can learn a lot more about the details of that expansion. One example is that my adoptive father, the neurosurgeon, so important in my life, he passed over 4 years before my coma. And surprise to me, he was nowhere to be found in my near-death experience. If I had scripted it, he would have been there front and center. And yet he was nowhere. And it turns out 2.5 years after my coma, during a deep meditation using sacred acoustic style binaural beat brainwave entrainment, I encountered my father's soul in this beautiful vision. He was there with his college roommate. They both appeared in their early 20s. And when he turned and looked at me with this wink and smile, just like he used to give me when I was a young kid, that showed us, yeah, we're in on this. You and I, we get this. He turned and looked at me in this vision in my meditation. Very profound. And again, I describe it in detail in Living in a Mindful Universe, so people who want to learn more can read it in there. But to me, so much came from that interaction with my father at that point. And since then, he's also been very influential in some of the other kind of education and enlightenment I've encountered through meditation. But by developing a rich relationship and interaction and investigating this NDE of mine through a meditative practice, I've come to get a lot more information out of it all to help put it together. And I work with scientists around the world who do all of this same work, because the evidence leads in this one direction. The evidence does not lead us back to that bleak and paltry fiction of materialist science that pretends we're all separate beings and that the material world is all that exists. All the evidence points forward to this beautiful opening to a rich spiritual existence that we all share as spiritual beings living in a primarily spiritual universe. And this is a deeply scientific conclusion. Go to GalileoCommission.org or scientificandmedical.net. Those are two websites of scientific groups that I work with as a scientific advisor. And you will see that the scientific revolution is well underway. And it is just in time to rescue us from the worst travesties of materialist thinking and its false sense of separation that allows things like profit motive and greed and warfare. Imagine the insanity of a world today where we actually have political leaders who will talk about using atomic weapons. I mean, that's the highest form of insanity. We as human beings should take responsibility to eliminate from this world any leader who ever discusses using atomic weapons, in warfare. Warfare itself needs to be completely banned, but it's up to us, because the leaders will pretend it's nation versus nation. But in fact, it's humanity and human beings against insane leaders who would try and destroy everything that we have. And they are the ones that need to be eliminated. And the atomic weapons need to be eliminated, and our addiction to fossil fuels. There are many things that the wisdom that emerges from this primacy of consciousness movement in science will lead us towards. And it is generally a much healthier, more harmonious, and prosperous world for all involved. But we need to take care of each other and take care of this beautiful planet. And that involves the wisdom that comes from this kind of discussion about the nature of reality and of our spiritual selves and of the potential for our souls to lead us into a world of our dreams.
Wow. All right. You mentioned binaural beats. And this is something that I don't even remember how long ago I heard about it. I understand the technique of how it works, but I would like you to explain it, because it's something I've always wanted to do, but I've never quite been able to just like push the decision button to be like, all right, I'm going to buy this, and this is the one. You've done all the science work around this, so I would trust what you are personally using. And I know that you are connected with a company called Sacred Acoustics. So we explained to everybody what this is, how it works, and how it can help us to have some of these transformative experiences, because I think that this is what opens up the collective consciousness to start to go to the next level.
Right. Well, first of all, I'll point out that every sound that you may have heard, a chant, anthem, hymn, that might have induced a transcendental state of conscious awareness, those sounds are all processed in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes. That's in circuits in the temporal lobe that have evolved over the last 2 or 3 million years in primates and Homo sapiens. Very different is the situation with sacred acoustics and binaural beats. They are using a slight difference in frequency to the two ears, a phenomenon discovered by a Prussian physicist in the 1800s, that a pure tone in one ear and a slightly different, and by that I mean anything from 0 to 25 hertz different in the other ear, will induce somewhere in the brain this very powerful modulatory wavering signal. And it can have a tremendous effect. In fact, binaural beats were investigated in the mid and late 20th century because of their ability to induce out-of-body experiences. That was the work mainly of Robert Monroe at the Monroe Institute. They were also investigated because of their enhancement of remote viewing skills. So people found that, this technique of remote viewing, which is using your mind to discern information at a distance and across time. For example, the blue ring of Jupiter was first seen by remote viewer Ingo Swann in 1973, and it was 6 years later that the Voyager spacecraft went by Jupiter and confirmed a blue ring, just as Ingo Swann had seen in a remote viewing session. That's an example of remote viewing in a scientific setting. But anyway, so I knew of those kind of connections way back 2 years post-coma. And I also realized I'd read 150 books or more trying to make sense of my experience, books on quantum physics, books on spiritual traditions, East and West. And I finally realized I had to meditate. I had to go within consciousness if I really wanted to start dissecting my experience and understanding it. And that's when I discovered binaural beats. And the issue is they actually interacted a circuit in the lower brainstem that arose more than 300 million years ago. An important principle in evolutionary biology is if you want to understand more about a function, in this discussion, that function would be consciousness. What you do is you look at the anatomic structures associated, the brain and nervous system, and you also look at them across evolutionary time. So you look at how they were, millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, how they are today, how they got there, and what's been the change in function that allied with the change in anatomy that allied with the change in evolution. And that's why I think these tones have such incredible power. And what I've learned to do long ago is my little ego voice. This is, first of all, acknowledging that the voice in your head is not your soul, not your consciousness. It's a little parlor trick. And a big part of meditation is getting more in touch with your true soul, with that higher primordial mind, with that God mind. And we can do that by turning off that ego voice in our head. And something like sacred acoustics uses this very powerful effect on your lower brainstem to cause a left-right oscillation. Now, most of us familiar with hypnosis, for example, know that if you use a pendulum and your eyes follow the pendulum, what you're doing is you're causing a left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem, down in the midbrain in that kind of case. Likewise, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, very effective in treating post-traumatic stress disorder, is something that uses rapid eye movements. Again, oscillations in the lower brainstem. And what you're doing with sacred acoustics and similar binaural beat brainwave entrainment is actually going to an even more primitive, more powerful level of the nervous system in the lower brainstem, in the medulla, in the superior olivary nucleus, and you're causing an oscillation there. And that oscillation has a powerful modulatory effect on what are called the ignition signals coming up from the reticular activating system in the lower brainstem. So 40 times per second, we have a now signal, bam, bam, going up to unite all the activity in our neocortex and the deeper thalamic structures in the brain. And modern neuroscience roughly postulates that kind of mechanism of this ignition system and then all the interaction of the thalamocortical loops is what gives rise to our conscious awareness. Well, it turns out by modulating that signal at a very primitive level, that's what allows our conscious awareness to be set free. And it liberates us from the here, now, and sense of self. You'll know what I mean when it happens. Go try sacred acoustics. It turns out, for example, sacred acoustics, there's a peer-reviewed scientific study that greatly supports the reality and effectiveness of sacred acoustics to alleviate anxiety. That report was by Dr. Anna Yusim in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, peer-reviewed, and it was in February of 2020 when it came out. And basically, Dr. Yusim found a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms in her busy Manhattan practice in New York City over 2 weeks of listening. That's compared to only a 7% reduction in patients who got standard talk therapy for anxiety during those same 2 weeks. So those who listened to sacred acoustics had a tremendous boost in their ability to alleviate anxiety. And anxiety is just the beginning, I promise you. What this does is by connecting you with higher soul and putting your ego voice, which your ego uses fear and anxiety as its main tools, by putting them into timeout, you greatly empower your kind of higher soul and ability to rise above all of those kind of ego problematic and toxic experiences and get up into the level of higher soul and that primordial mind. And that is what allows us to leave behind those falsehoods and presumptions and the fears and anxieties that the ego uses so effectively We escape all that into higher soul, where we have much greater ability to kind of see our role in the universe and our ability to move forward in a very positive direction. So using sacred acoustics can be an incredibly powerful tool to liberate you from the shackles of your ego mind and the insanity of our materialist presumptions in our modern culture, and allow you to participate more readily in this kind of robust expansion of human capacity through acknowledging our higher soul and interconnectedness of soul in the spiritual realm. In the spiritual realm.
All right, I totally believe in this science. I've looked into it enough to know, but I've never been able to choose which one to use and how. And one of the other issues that I have, that I know a lot of other people, because I've had this conversation for a very long time. Not everybody has the ability to meditate. I am a super sleeper. If I get on a plane and I want to fall asleep, I can fall asleep in that. If it took me 2 minutes to fall asleep, I think I would panic. I could get 12 hours of sleep, I could get 15 hours of sleep. I could get up and try and meditate and I will fall asleep. It's guaranteed. I don't know what it is about me. So I do walking meditation, but obviously I'm not going to be in the desert with rattlesnakes and walking meditation with binaural beats. So have you had this come up with other people? And is that something that is overcome by using this technology to help meditate?
Well, yes, I think it is. And one thing I would advise you is, for example, I found that my best practice was to meditate in the late morning. And that is, after a good night's sleep, get up, get things done. And then if I've got a little time, I do meditation, and I don't fall asleep. Falling asleep was a problem earlier in meditation, but I'll also point out, interestingly enough, that there would be like a 40-minute meditation that I felt went by in 5 minutes. And I said, oh, I guess I fell asleep. But then in a later meditation, I would ask the question, what happened during that absent period in the last meditation? And I'd find out a lot of things had happened. So a lot of it is just you're not remembering and bringing the information back. But I think if you practice with it, you'll find ways, and especially to do the meditation when you're not, likely to fall asleep, like when you're really tired. But do it at a time when you're very, very energized. And some people might try and sit up or things like that. I prefer lying down, reclining. But you can do that. I know that Karen had a lot of trouble too with meditation, in the sense that she felt she couldn't meditate, mainly because she was a program manager, very busy in her work. She worked in the publishing industry and was a big manager of other people. So she had to concentrate on all that kind of thing. And her mind was always doing lists, when she tried to meditate. But the sacred acoustics, the one real benefit of it is once you've kind of learned this concept of your ego mind is not who you are, it's a parlor trick. It becomes much easier to go into meditation, let the ego mind make a statement, request, ask a question, but then just learn to ride the tones, listen to the tones, focus on your breathing, and just let it unfold. And what happens, it basically takes you into the hypnagogic space. Hypnagogic space is between wake and asleep. Hypnagogic is literally when we are going from awakeness to asleepness. Hypnopompic is the technical term for coming out of that. But ultimately, that's what we're trying to induce. And that involves brainwave states that are mainly kind of in that 3 to 6 cycle. 3 is delta, 6 is theta, 9 is alpha, as kind of central points. But what we're trying to do is use these frequencies of the binaural beats to generate that modulatory signal in kind of the 3 and 6 hertz range. And that's what allows people to really be set free, by getting to those lower frequencies. And when you learn to just ride it, just relax with it, because I promise you it's doable, because I did it myself. I used to have this very active monkey mind too that was interfering with any attempt at meditation. But what you find is that you can just ride these tones, and by giving you that strong left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem, you can learn to relax into it. And that's where you enter that hypnagogic space, and that's where the universe starts answering your big questions that you asked at the beginning of meditation by throwing in the material like past life memories and other kind of demonstrations that may seem like dream fragments, but you're kind of almost in a lucid dream when you're in that hypnagogic space. So you're actually able to kind of take the information, use it, and run with it. But it's an interesting dance of not trying to control it. And that's the interesting thing is you don't want your little ego mind to jump in there and say, I can do this. That potentially can kind of get in the way of progress. But it's really the essence of learning how to trust the universe, to trust your higher soul and your connection with that primordial mind to give you the material you need to make the decisions and to learn what you need to learn in this moment.
Have you
Sometimes my
asked?
question going into a meditation will be as simple as, what do I need to know right now?
Mm.
That general. And the universe has a way of telling you what you need to know right now.
Have you astral traveled with this technique?
Yes, I mean, that actually is how we kind of got started with our inertia as a group. That is, Karen Newell and Kevin Cossie, the co-founders of Sacred Acoustics, were doing this work together privately. And they shared it with me when I went to a workshop at the Monroe Institute and met Karen Newell. And I was a huge fan of the binaural beats. And then when I heard what Karen and Kevin were doing, it was like, oh my God, this is so much more powerful than what I was used to. I was used to the old HemiSync, which basically stopped its main development in 1995 when Robert Monroe died. And there were issues involved with the legal factions between the private and the kind of institute that didn't allow further development of the technology. But that's a place where Kevin Cossie and Karen Newell could jump far into the future by experimenting and doing new things with binaural beats. And that's why Sacred Acoustics is definitely my go-to favorite for a provider of binaural beats. You'll find lots of binaural beats out there. A particular warning, do not trust binaural beats off YouTube, for
I
example.
knew it. Yes.
Problem is YouTube compresses. All these technologies compress. In fact, they couldn't put Sacred Acoustics in the iTunes store because iTunes makes you compress it. When you compress it, you lose some of the best frequencies that are most effective. And so when you do Sacred Acoustics, get it straight from the source. Don't get it off YouTube or any other source. Get it from the app or from sacredacoustics.com, and you get pure, rich, full bore binaural beats that are not missing any of the powerful frequencies. But don't trust that nonsense that comes out of YouTube because it's been so smashed up to make it fit their bandwidth requirements that it's useless.
I think it's the same thing with all those frequency musics and those frequency meditations that are on YouTube too. I think you've lost a lot with
Well,
that
a
as well.
lot, I know that's true for binaural beats because you really need high bandwidth to get the kind of frequency range that gives you the effect in your brainstem. And if
Yeah.
you compress that, you lose a lot of it and it's just not effective. So forget it.
So
Do not waste your time on any binaural beats out of YouTube or off the iTunes store for that matter, because of the compression. Forget about it. Go to sacredacoustics.com to find out something that's really powerful, non-compressed, that can really work.
so if I want to try this and I've never done it before and I go there, are there a lot of different choices or am I just picking one to start as a beginner?
There are many choices, but there's also I want to do this page. So whatever you want to do, whether it's astral projection, relaxation, the list is long, but she's got all that there and then has specific programs of which Sacred Acoustics tunes can do it. Now, very important, if you want a starting point, mentioned already Dr. Anna Usom's study of Sacred Acoustics. It showed this powerful alleviation of anxiety. Well, that will use the whole mind bundle. If you go to sacredacoustics.com and look for the whole mind bundle, you'll find the set of frequencies that were used for that study. You can download those. In fact, she reduced the price. That scientific study came out in February 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And Karen recognized that a lot of people were facing horrible anxiety and hardship through the pandemic and then the economic collapse. So she dropped the price of Whole Mind Bundle to $19, an incredibly good bargain. But in addition, she recognized that many people in the pandemic didn't have any money. So they put a free button on there. So she's
Oh,
left that free button at the Whole Mind Bundle So it's still available for free. We trust that people who have the financial resources will pay for it. They're getting it at a great price. But for those out there with anxiety, pandemic, post-pandemic, the economic stress, et cetera, it's still there for free too. So, and that's the study that gave a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms in that psychiatric practice over 2 weeks. So it's in a peer-reviewed, scientifically reviewed article been proven as an effective technique. It's a great place to start. But I would also recommend some of my personal favorites on sacred acoustics,
Yes,
especially for
please.
journeying.
Yeah.
Go to Heart Center 2, A Spiral of Time. Um, I love water. I love um, Primordial Mind. I mean, there's several there that are just really stellar examples. And if you just try them and keep using them over and over again, you'll start to see what I mean. And the other thing about sacred acoustics that's so great is they have an incredible richness of variety there. I mean, if you download that app and have access to that ultimate bundle, which is everything that they offer, you have years and years worth of exploration in front of you. Just incredible potential in all these different directions because there's a huge amount of variety of what these sacred acoustics tones offer. But again, pay attention to our website, exploresacredacoustics.com. You can learn a whole lot more about meditation and about how to make these tools useful in your life.
And do you have to have a specific type of a headset to listen to it on? I would imagine. No?
No, not at all.
Really?
In fact, for one, some people go for fancy noise reduction headphones. I would avoid noise reduction in general because, again, you're risking if you're in an environment that actually has noise, you don't know what the frequency of that noise is and what it is doing to interfere with the tones that finally get to you. So don't avoid noise reduction if you can. I sometimes use it on airplanes, for example, and it's fine. But in general, you simple headphones work. Earbuds work.
Wow. I'm so
Uh,
surprised to hear you say that. That
you
makes
don't
me
need
so
big fancy
excited.
headphones at all. Do not do that. That's a waste of resource.
It's a
Uh,
part of why I never did it because I thought, oh, I have to have this right thing, and I couldn't figure out
no.
what the right thing was. I'm so glad you shared that.
I
All
often
right.
use
I know you've given me.
I often use a set of Edifier headphones that I think cost $26. So no, you don't have to spend a lot of money on and luckily the Sacred Acoustics is also very inexpensive. So people can get into this journey without a huge sticker shock.
Okay, this is amazing. All right. I know we're limited on time. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
Okay, last question for you is, do you think that our planet is going through a change in consciousness right now?
Absolutely, without question. We are going through a paradigm shift that's been more than 5,000 years in the making. In many ways, we're returning to some of the deepest and richest spiritual truths of ancient traditions, East and West, of unity of mind, of the binding force of love. But given the scientific support for the reality of near-death experiences and other related phenomena of parapsychology and non-local consciousness, we are facing a tremendous revolution in our understanding of human nature, free will, and our potential to change this universe for the better and to take far better care of our planet. So it's a revolution that's absolutely essential for our very existence in the coming centuries.
Well, since the change is happening, and I always try to give people a nugget of wisdom from the people I'm talking to, what would you tell the people who are watching that they can do to help affect the collective consciousness as we go through that change?
I would simply say you will be amazed how much power is demonstrated when you change your beliefs. It's amazing how many of our cultural societal beliefs are falsely limiting of your capability of influencing your world, bringing health, wholeness, and healing, and certainly progression of understanding, shared meaning and purpose. I mean, there's a tremendous consolidation of understanding of our humanity that brings tremendous promise to what we can bring into reality in the coming years. And that is all apparent as one gets more deeply involved in this scientific revolution about the primacy of consciousness.
Wow. Thank you so much. I am so grateful. You were in such a unique position because as a neurosurgeon, you were already making money. You obviously didn't get into this whole field and this discussion and change everything about your life because you're going to get rich doing it.
Yeah. This
As a matter of fact, you had so much more to lose by sharing this than to gain. So I just want to thank you so much for taking your brain power and doing all this study, all this research. You gave us so many sites to check out, books to listen to, and you've recorded so much so that people don't have to try and absorb it all in one place. They can go to your books and they can read it and they can highlight things and they can go back to it and then they can use these tools and techniques like the sacred acoustics. I am just so grateful for what you are doing to help the collective consciousness.
Well, thank you very much. And the last two sites I would like to give you, one is bigelowinstitute.org. That has 29 winning essays that prove scientifically the reality of the afterlife and reincarnation. And also innersanctumcenter.com, INERsanctumcenter.com. If people go there, they'll see that's a site that Karen and I put up. It was Karen's wisdom behind it all, but it has 2 years worth of biweekly interviews we did with thought leaders on consciousness around the world during the pandemic. All those interviews available for free, innersanctumcenter.com. There's also a monthly webinar we do with a lot of our biggest fans. And also there's a mental health practitioner course that we did with Dr. Anna Yusum, also available, that one at a cost, but at Inner Sanctum Center. All these are resources available there. So
And is there
thank you for
anything,
sharing this and getting
yeah,
it
is
out.
there anything else that you want to share that you are doing that's coming up that you want people to know about?
No, I think that's enough for now. Karen and I have another book idea that we're tossing about that we think can be very powerful and helpful at changing this world for the better. But we're still working on that. It's nothing actually written down yet, but Karen and I are working on it. Don't worry.
Well, when you have that, would you please come back and talk to us about that book too?
Absolutely. We will do that for
Oh my
sure.
gosh. This has been just my pleasure and just a great joy. I feel so lucky to be able to talk to people like you, and I'm just so appreciative. Thank you so much.
Well, Laurie, it's been a great joy talking with you too. And thanks for doing what you do, getting this out to the world.
Yes, and thank you so much,
Namaste.
everybody, for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.